The late afternoon sun filtered through the dense canopy of the forest, casting a kaleidoscope of shadows on the moss-covered ground. A slow breeze stirred the leaves, whispering secrets from faraway places. A solitary figure moved cautiously through the underbrush. A fox named Socks, her tawny coat blending seamlessly with the dappled sunlight. Socks had lived here for years, in the heart of the sanctuary, where trees towered and the earth was rich with the smell of damp soil and decaying leaves. She knew these woods like the back of her paw, every rustle of the wind, every snap of a twig, and every unfamiliar scent. But today there was something different. As Socks padded silently through the undergrowth, her keen eyes caught a faint movement. She froze. Her tail flicked in the air, and her ears pricked up. Her sharp instincts had never failed her before, but today there was an unsettling feeling. The familiar hum of the forest seemed to stutter, a sudden silence falling over the expanse. A small figure emerged from the shadows, an animal that Socks had never seen before in these woods. A kitten. Its fur was matted and dirty, its small frame hunched and fragile. The creature moved with an odd hesitation, as though it didn't quite belong to the forest but had wandered in by accident. Socks watched from the shadows, a twinge of concern curling in her chest. The kitten was not from this place. It was out of place, its wide eyes reflecting confusion, and its tiny body trembling. Socks knew the forest could be a cruel place for the unprepared. It was unforgiving, especially for those not accustomed to its wild ways. The kitten's soft mewling echoed faintly in the clearing, but there was no one around to answer. No mother, no other kittens, just this one small soul lost in the woods. With a slow, deliberate step, Socks crept closer, her body a whisper among the ferns. The kitten's eyes locked with hers, a moment of understanding passing between the two, despite the fear and confusion in the animal's gaze. Socks had never been one to approach strangers, but something in the kitten's vulnerability stirred something protective within her. As the sun began to dip lower in the sky, a strange tension thickened the air. The forest had always been a place of life and death, but today it felt as though the balance had shifted. The distant call of a hawk echoed through the trees, the sound sharp and piercing. It was a warning, a reminder of the dangers lurking in the depths of the sanctuary. Socks instinctively crouched, her tail twitching. She could hear movement nearby, slow, deliberate steps that didn't belong to the forest's usual inhabitants. The hairs on the back of her neck bristled. Something was wrong. The kitten, too, seemed to sense the shift in the air. Its eyes grew wide, its tiny paws skittering on the forest floor as it tried to retreat, but the fear in its movements only made it more vulnerable. Socks held her breath, unsure of what to do. Should she protect it, or let it fend for itself as the forest demanded? The rustling grew louder, and soon the source revealed itself. A large, shadowy figure stepped into the clearing, a wild dog. Its eyes glowing yellow in the fading light, its muscles coiled and ready to pounce. Its sharp teeth gleamed in the dim light, and its hackles stood on end. The dog had been hunting, and it had found its prey. Sock's heart raced. She knew the wild dog well. It was a predator, a force of nature that could strike with deadly precision. The kitten was no match for it. The fox's mind raced. She could hear the blood pounding in her ears, the adrenaline coursing through her veins. There was no time to hesitate. With a quick movement, Socks lunged forward, darting between the wild dog and the kitten. She snarled, her teeth bared, ready to defend the helpless creature. The wild dog growled in response, its stance shifting as it sized up the smaller animal. A battle of wills, of survival. Socks circled, her every movement calculated, trying to get the wild dog to shift its focus. The kitten had scampered off behind a nearby bush, out of immediate danger, for now. The dog was a formidable opponent, but Socks had lived in these woods for years. She knew how to fight with the environment, how to use her speed and agility to her advantage. The wild dog took a step forward, its muscles rippling beneath its fur, and just as it was about to lunge, Socks darted to the side, leading it into the dense thicket. It growled in frustration, its sharp teeth snapping at the empty air. But then there was a new sound, a sharp, sudden cry that echoed across the clearing. The kitten. Socks froze. The wild dog's head whipped around, and in that moment, Socks knew the danger had shifted. The kitten had been foolish enough to move too far from cover, and now it was exposed in the open. Without thinking, Socks sprang forward, but before she could reach the kitten, the wild dog was already charging toward it. In a heartbeat, the tension snapped. The wild dog was upon the kitten, its jaws snapping, but just as the fox was about to give her final desperate push, something unexpected happened. The wild dog hesitated. It sniffed the kitten, its growls momentarily fading as it stood still, its yellow eyes now studying the fragile creature beneath it. Socks froze, unsure of what was happening. The wild dog, instead of attacking, backed away slowly, its posture shifting to something almost submissive. The kitten, confused, looked up with wide eyes. And then, in a moment that made no sense at all, the wild dog turned and trotted away, disappearing into the forest without so much as a glance back. Socks stood, panting heavily, her heart still racing. What had just happened? She watched as the kitten, now unharmed, scampered back into the brush, its tiny form disappearing into the shadows of the forest. It wasn't until the wind shifted again, carrying with it a scent unfamiliar, yet strangely familiar, that Socks understood. The wild dog hadn't come to hunt the kitten, it had come to protect it. The forest was a place of mysteries, a place where even the most savage predators sometimes had their own stories to tell. And as the evening deepened into night, the world around Socks grew quieter, the tension easing. The kitten was safe, but for how long? The fox, now alone in the growing darkness, let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The forest whispered on, as it always did, with its secrets, its dangers, and its unexpected alliances. And deep within it, a stray kitten had found a protector. One who, for reasons unknown, would never be alone in the woods again. As the moon began to rise, casting a silver glow over the forest floor, the tension in the air lingered like a faint aftertaste. Socks stood still for a moment longer, her sharp eyes scanning the darkened woods. The sounds of the forest returned gradually, but the uneasy feeling persisted. She had seen the wild dog retreat, but she couldn't shake the strange sensation that something was off, something larger than just a fleeting encounter. The forest, with its unspoken laws of survival, had moments of unbalance, and today there had been a shift. Socks made her way back toward her den, her movements deliberate and cautious. The ground beneath her paws felt colder now, and the faintest chill had crept into the air. As she neared the familiar thicket, she slowed her pace, her senses on high alert. There was a new scent in the wind, a pungent, unfamiliar musk that gnawed at the edges of her calm. A rustling sound broke the silence, not from the usual rustle of leaves or the scampering of smaller creatures, but from something much larger. A shadow flickered at the edge of the clearing. Sock's fur bristled as her instincts screamed at her to retreat, but she was too late. The kitten reappeared from the underbrush, its tiny paws moving quickly as it scampered across the clearing. The way it moved was frantic, unnatural for such a small creature. Something had spooked it. Socks narrowed her eyes, her ears flat against her head. The kitten, now visibly shaken, froze for a moment before continuing to dart erratically through the trees, its frantic movements almost as though it were trying to outrun an invisible force. Then the reason for the kitten's terror became clear. A new scent mingled with the air, the unmistakable odor of a predator, something far more sinister than the wild dog. A low growl rumbled in the distance, a deep, vibrating sound that seemed to come from the very heart of the forest itself. Sox hesitated, her body tense, her mind racing. She knew this part of the sanctuary well. There were few true predators here, and none that hunted in packs. But this felt different. The growl came again, louder, closer this time, as though something large and powerful was moving through the trees, its every step deliberate and menacing. Sox could feel the ground beneath her paws tremble slightly with each passing moment. The kitten, panicked beyond reason, was still darting through the underbrush, but its erratic movements were only drawing more attention. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Then, in the space between one heartbeat and the next, the shadows around them began to deepen, and the shape of the new predator emerged from the dark woods. A towering figure, eyes glowing with an unnatural yellow hue. It wasn't just a wild dog. It wasn't even a creature from these woods at all. It was a lynx, far larger than any Sox had ever seen, its powerful frame rippling beneath its thick coat. But this was no ordinary lynx. Its eyes glinted with a strange, unnerving intelligence, and the muscles of its body moved with a fluidity that made it look like a shadow come to life. It was far too large to be a mere wanderer, and far too focused on the kitten to be simply passing through. Sox's heart pounded. She recognized the creature immediately, a predator who didn't belong to the natural order of the sanctuary, a creature that had been driven from another part of the forest, or perhaps even a part of an invasive species, introduced by humans or brought in by some unknown force. The lynx didn't pause. It prowled forward, its eyes locked on the trembling kitten, the faintest hint of a growl vibrating in its chest. The kitten, too terrified to run, cowered in the dirt, its small body quivering as though it knew its fate. Sox acted without thinking, a rush of adrenaline propelling her forward. She knew that she was no match for the lynx's size and strength. Her only chance was speed and perhaps a well-timed distraction. As the lynx took another step toward the kitten, Sox launched herself from the shadows, her body a blur of motion. The lynx barely had time to react before she was darting between its massive paws, nipping at its hind legs in an attempt to provoke it. The lynx twisted, its claws flashing in the dim light, but Sox was already gone, slipping back into the brush. The predator hesitated for only a moment, its eyes scanning the trees for the source of the unexpected disturbance. It wasn't used to being challenged, but then, as if deciding it was not worth the chase, it refocused on the kitten. The fox's heart raced, her mind screaming for her to run. But she couldn't leave the kitten to face this alone. The situation was dire, but there was one last chance. Sox, thinking quickly, ran in a wide arc around the lynx, keeping herself hidden in the shadows. She knew that the lynx was not used to being hunted. It relied on its intimidation and brute force, not its cunning. She would use that to her advantage. Just as the lynx took another step toward the helpless kitten, Sox launched herself directly at its face, her paws landing with a soft thud on its broad muzzle. The lynx recoiled, momentarily stunned, giving Sox the precious seconds she needed to dart into the underbrush once more. The lynx snarled in frustration, its growls becoming more furious, but now it was disoriented, its attention divided. It was no longer just focused on the kitten. It was looking for the elusive, daring fox. Sox took another chance, weaving through the thick foliage, keeping herself just out of reach, her heart pounding in her chest. And then, in a flash, the lynx did something unexpected. It turned its back on the kitten and padded into the forest, its body disappearing into the dark expanse. It didn't chase, it didn't fight. It simply vanished, as if the forest itself had swallowed it whole. Sox stood still, breathing heavily. The kitten, now trembling but unscathed, was huddled in the safety of the underbrush. The air was thick with the sound of her rapid heartbeat and the silence that followed the lynx's departure. The tension in the forest began to lift, though Socks remained alert, her instincts still sharp. She knew that the creature was still out there, somewhere in the woods, but for now it had retreated, and the kitten was safe. Socks's chest swelled with a strange pride mixed with lingering unease. She had defended the creature, but the feeling of victory was fleeting. There was more at play here than she could understand. As the first rays of dawn touched the treetops, a sense of quiet resolution settled over the forest. The forest was wild, unpredictable, and sometimes it was more than just survival. There were forces at play here, forces that even the most seasoned creatures like Socks couldn't fully comprehend. And deep within the shadows of the forest, the kitten sat, forever bound to the mysterious protector who had saved it. The woods once again returned to their quiet rhythm, but the echoes of the night's strange encounter would linger, unanswered, like a riddle whispered in the wind. The morning light crept slowly across the forest, the trees casting long shadows as the cool, dew-laden air shimmered with the scent of damp earth and fresh pine. Socks, her muscles still tense from the night's encounter, remained close to the underbrush, watching the kitten with a quiet, alert gaze. The little creature had calmed considerably, its wide eyes now half closed in the gentle warmth of the early light. But it did not move far. It seemed to sense, as Socks did, that the peace was fragile, a mere veneer over the deeper currents of danger lurking just beyond the horizon. Socks padded forward, her movements silent, her body low to the ground. She was no stranger to the wood's unpredictable nature, but something in the air today felt different, heavier, as if the forest itself was waiting for something to unfold. The shadows had not fully receded, and the oppressive weight of the unknown still clung to the trees like fog. She glanced at the kitten, who was now watching her intently. Its tiny frame trembled slightly, not from fear, but from something more profound, a sense of survival that had been etched into its bones during the brief moments of terror the night before. The forest, wild and indifferent, had always been this way. Merciless for the unprepared, but merciful for those who knew its ways. Socks had learned to navigate it with wisdom and stealth, but the kitten, it had been thrown into the unknown, and it would need time to adapt. The sounds of the forest, chirping birds, rustling leaves, the distant crackle of twigs underfoot, felt distant now, as if the land itself were holding its breath. Socks continued forward, pausing only when the hairs on her back bristled once more. Something was off. There was no sign of the lynx, but the predator's presence was still there, lingering in the wind, carrying its scent far and wide. Suddenly the air shifted. The forest's low murmur faded, replaced by a subtle, almost imperceptible crackling sound, a vibration through the ground, like the brush of something massive moving through the forest. Socks froze. The kitten, sensing her change in posture, followed her gaze and crouched, its tiny body tense, its ears flattened against its skull. A shape moved troughed the trees, a flicker of dark fur, no growl, no roar, just the quiet, deliberate motion of something far too large to be ignored. Socks' instincts screamed at her to flee, but she forced herself to remain still, to watch and wait. This was no ordinary animal. The figure moved into the clearing, and Socks' heart skipped a beat. It wasn't the lynx. It was something more insidious. The creature that emerged from the shadows was not a wild dog, nor was it a lynx, though it carried the same sleek, failing grace. This was larger, far larger. Its body was elongated, almost serpentine, with sleek black fur that shimmered like liquid night. Its eyes, yellow like the lynx's, glowed faintly as it surveyed its surroundings, its gaze steady, predatory. Its ears twitched, sensing something in the air, but it was not searching for the kitten. It was searching for something else. Sops felt a wave of dread settle deep in her chest. The creature was not a part of the natural world. Its presence felt wrong, like an anomaly. It did not belong here. It was a predator of a different kind, a creature that had learned to thrive in places where it should not. Its very presence seemed to warp the forest around it, the light bending strangely, the air thickening with a sense of unease. It moved with a hauntingly quiet grace, each step deliberate, as though it was both hunting and being hunted. Its presence filled the clearing with an eerie tension that made the very trees feel like they were holding their breath. The kitten, still huddled in the brush, did not dare make a sound. But Socks knew it would not be long before this strange creature found it. This was not the wild dog driven by hunger, nor the lynx driven by instinct. This was something else entirely, something far more dangerous and cunning.